All right, who wants to start? Start with Mr. Billups. I think I have this turned on.
The United States in math ranks number 25 out of...
I'm sorry, can you introduce yourself?
My name is Lorenz Billups. I'm a senior here at Charles A. Tindley. I plan on attending Wabash College next year in Crawfordsville, Indiana. My question is... My question is, in math and science, out of 30 comparable countries, the United States ranks near the bottom, number 25 in math and number 21 in science. However, we're spending approximately $30,000 over what other countries are spending per student. How can we address that issue and get students here to achieve the same numbers as students in other countries?
So, first of all, you can have my job when you're ready. So, I'm just warming it up for you.
Yeah.
No easy answer. Challenge your numbers a little bit. Your basic facts on the international data, the PISA results are exactly right. We're not spending $30,000 more per student than other countries. We don't begin to spend $30,000 per student here. It is true we do spend more per student than many countries. What we don't do, it's interesting. There are a couple things strategically that I think we're getting wrong. I'm spending more and more of my time looking at these international benchmarks and spending time with leaders from around the globe because that's where the competition is. So a couple things that they do differently. First of all, other countries attract the top talent into education. And the highest performing countries, Singapore, South Korea, only the top third of college graduates get to go into education. And Finland is the top 10%. So 90% of folks who want to teach, they don't allow them to teach. This is the best of the best getting in. They pay teachers very differently, compensate them at a much higher level. Teachers are a much more respected profession. That's something I think we've beaten down education here, and that has to change. I keep trying to figure out how we elevate teaching, how we strengthen teaching. I talked about, I just keep coming back to it, Singapore, South Korea, teachers are known as nation builders. That's a really, really different concept than how we view teachers here. I think our teachers are nation builders. We got to bring that respect back. Ultimately, in math and science, we have a couple real challenges. We don't have enough teachers who know math and science. And it's hard to instill a love of something that you sort of struggle with. And it's not just at the high school level AP, it's in 4th and 5th and 6th grade, where some teachers start to be less comfortable with the content. They start to pull back, and students feel that. So a couple things we're trying to do. The president has challenged us to recruit 100,000 new math and science teachers. We're putting close to $300 million in our budget behind the STEM fields. We want to put a lot of money to have teachers go back to learn more math and science. We're going to do $10,000 scholarships for the hardest working juniors and seniors in college who want to teach. We want to give them direct grants if they'll come teach for at least 3 years of us. I need a lot more men to come teach. I need a lot more men of color. And I'm out traveling the country with that message. I want our teachers to reflect the great diversity of our students. How many of our teachers in our country do you think are black males?
1%.
10%? I wish to God it was 10%. It's less than 2%. Less than 1 in 50. Same thing in Hispanics. Less than 1 in 50 of our Latino teachers, a lot of our teachers are Latino males. And so then we wonder as a country why our young boys of color struggle. And so we want to recruit great talent into the profession. We want to make sure that talent reflects the diversity. We put a lot of resources behind that. And again, not just at the high school level, at the elementary level. The final thing I'll say is that we've had a shortage of math and science for a couple decades. So those numbers you talked about, PISA, just didn't happen by accident. We haven't done the right thing. Not everyone agrees with me. I think we should pay math and science teachers a lot more money. I just gave a speech to a couple thousand math teachers, and you pick a number, 5 grand, 15 grand, 20 grand. If you can get a great math or science teacher to work in a disadvantaged community, inner city, urban, rural, I think that's the best investment we can make. I think we have to stop what I call admiring the problem, describing the problem, and we got to solve it.
Mr. Billings, you asked such an incredibly important question. If you don't mind, I'm just going to add a couple words to that. Indiana agrees with you so strongly. I mean, the reason you were right to center on science and math is nothing is more closely associated with success, economic success in this world right now than math and science. The individuals who master it are going to go further, much further, and earn more. The countries that master it are going to succeed greater than others. So there's no more important question anybody could ask, I don't think, than yours. We're trying to do everything we can in Indiana to give expression to what the Secretary just talked about. going forward, those of you who decide to become teachers in math or science will have to major in math or science. And you can minor in education, but you will get to the classroom confident, as he said, and ready to teach at the highest level. We're bringing people in from mid-career. We have more than one program to bring people in, quickly get them educated in how to teach. But people who already know from the military, from business, or from some other walk of life already know math and already know science. And we definitely believe in paying more for the best teachers and the most important disciplines. And so something we didn't mention, but earlier today I was so happy to announce that we have been able to take good enough care of the finances of this state that we're going to be able to put another $150 million this year in K-12 education. And the Secretary pointed out we're going to use a little bit of that, some of that money to finish off full-day kindergarten, but we're also going to use some of that money to create a first fund ever that the superintendent of instruction can use to help those districts pay our best teachers more. So the teacher who really knocks it out of the park and who really is excellent and whose students are doing well, we can't do enough for those folks, and we're going to get started proving it.
Thank you. Ms. Dotson.
Hello, my name is Janae Dotson, and I'm a sophomore here at the Charles A. Tindley School. And my question is, on the news lately, I've been hearing a lot about IPS schools like Northwest and Broad Ripple being at risk of being taken over by the government. And I was wondering, what exactly does that mean for the faculty, students, and the school?
All right, Janae, I'll go first, and we got the superintendent here who can fill in too. Let me start by saying, you say take over by the government. They're run by the government now. I mean, that is the government run its schools as a part of the government. So the government's already running them. The question is, if they're not being run well enough, should we get some new folks in to do better? And it's been proven here at Tindley that great success can happen anywhere, and so I don't believe for a minute it can't happen at Northwest or at any of the other schools. I think we have 23, I guess, 20 schools in the state that by any measure have just not delivered for their students for many, many, many years. And so, yes, Indiana has a law, and I know the Secretary supports laws like this that say at some point the government needs to step in and say, let's try it a different way. And Tony, you want to talk about what will happen in those cases where we act?
Well, Janae, what we will do is come in and we will actually first hold community meetings. We will get input, the State Board of Education, and then the State Board of Education will literally put together a plan for that school. It could mean someone like the folks who are running Tindley to run those schools. Okay, so what we are talking about doing is making sure that the two most important things that Secretary and the Governor talk about, a great leader and great teachers teaching to high expectations will be teaching the students in those schools just like they teach the students right here at Tindley.
Thank you very much. Next question. Mr. Treadwell.
Good afternoon. My name is Isaiah Treadwell, and I'm a sophomore. And my question is, with everything occurring in our economy, states are cutting education funds. This is affecting after-school programs and educational programs. So how can we grow as a better nation if these cuts are being allowed?
I'll start and turn it over to the governor. So these are very, very tough economic times, and that's just reality at the federal level, at the state level, at the local level. What I believe, I'm sure the governor believes, what the president believes, that we have to continue to invest in education, not in the status quo, but in a very different vision of where we can go. So we're trying to lead by example. At a time the president's basically flatlining domestic spending and making some very tough cuts at things he really likes in other areas, he's actually asking Congress for a $2 billion increase in funding for education. So we're trying to put our money where our mouth is and walk the walk. I think, again, the only way our country regains its strength is through great education. And when governors are having to make very tough budget times, and I had to balance the budget in Chicago Public Schools and I had to make some very tough budget cuts, how you set your budget reflects your values, reflects your priorities. And so when you have to make tough cuts, I think there's smart ways to do it, and frankly, there's some dumb ways to do it. And so we put out a bunch of information to every governor in the country, just our best thinking, they can take it or leave it, about where you can cut strategically to do the least damage and where you can continue to invest in things that make sense. What you often see happen is the easy thing to do is, well, if you have a 5% cut, you cut everything 5% across the board. What that tells me is you really don't understand what's working and what's not. If you have to cut 5%, you should actually be doubling your investments in some areas and cutting other things out altogether. And do you really understand where those scarce dollars are making a difference? So finding ways to maintain early childhood education is hugely important. Lots of governors aren't doing that, and I can't support that. After-school programs, extracurriculars, desperately important. Making sure we have a well-rounded curriculum. We have places that are eliminating days out of the school year, going to shorter school. We need more time, not less. I think technology can really help us do much better than we have. We haven't been smart enough in education how to use technology. So none of these are easy choices. You always have to make tough calls, but I think failing to invest and failing to invest wisely is penny wise and pound foolish. And again, where governors are finding ways to be creative and to keep investing where it's making a difference in students' lives, those are the kinds of places we want to celebrate and try and shine a spotlight on. But you're living this. Why don't you sort of walk through how you're thinking about it?
I agree with all that. I mean, Isaiah, another thing you should know is that the President and the Secretary succeeded in creating a very, very large amount of money during the tough economic years, what was called a stimulus bill, specifically for education. So yes, some states, Indiana to a very small extent, most states much more than that, did cut back, but it was replaced on a temporary basis with a very large amount from the federal government. Actually, total dollars spent in Indiana schools last year went up, and will again this year. Second thing I would say to you is that we have a very high priority in this state for K-12. Only public safety touches it. Only protecting people's lives and property is on the same plane with us. And something not too many Hoosiers know, but in the last budget and the one we're about to pass, it's only going to be more true. More than half of every dollar the state spends on everything will be spent on K-12 education. 55 cents of every dollar. That's #1 in America. There's not a state in America that devotes a higher percentage. So it's what the Secretary talked about. We said that's our top priority. We're going to do everything we can to maintain it, and we're going to just look at everywhere else. It doesn't mean those other things were not important. They're all important, or we shouldn't do them at all in government. But you have to decide what matters most, and for us it has been a K-12. And the last thing I'll say is that, and the Secretary already pointed this out, we must do a lot better. About 40 cents of the Indiana public education dollar doesn't get to the classroom. It doesn't pay a teacher, a teacher's aide. It doesn't provide the materials and so forth. We can do much, much better. There's so much more money already there, but it's in others, it's in support services or things that are not as crucial as getting a great teacher in every classroom every year and rewarding them for it.
All right, Mr. Archie.
My name is Mason Archie II. I'm a senior here at Charles A. Tindley, and in the future I plan on, well, very soon I plan on attending Davidson College and majoring in economics. Yep. My question is mainly for Mr. Secretary, but you can pitch in if you like.
You can do the whole thing.
Because of the Bush era No Child Left Behind law, I read in an article that you said 82% of the nation's public schools could be failing by 2012.
Could be labeled as failures.
Could be labeled as failures by 2012. Is that true? And if so, what is your stance on public school education, and what do you think was the problem with the No Child Left Behind Acts?
Great question. This could be like an hour-long conversation, so I'll try and keep it short. I'll first say what I think the law got right. What I always give the previous administration credit for is shining a spotlight on achievement gaps, this idea of disaggregating data. And I think historically as a country, we like to sweep under the rug where we had achievement gaps that were insidious and far too large. People didn't like to have those conversations. And so we absolutely want to keep that focus. There are lots of things I think don't work in the current law. I think it's very, very punitive. I think it doesn't reward success. There are lots of ways to fail. The only reward for success is you're not labeled a failure. We want to put a big spotlight on great teachers and great principals and great schools, great districts, great states. It was very top-down from Washington, very prescriptive. So I always tell the story that when I ran the Chicago Public Schools, I had to go to Washington and get in a huge fight with the Department of Education to be allowed to tutor my children after school. It was the craziest thing ever, but they tried to tell me I couldn't tutor my children. Luckily, I won, but I shouldn't have had to fight Washington to do that. It led, I think this was unintentional, but it led to a dumbing down of standards, and it led to a narrowing of the curriculum. So we have to reverse all those things. We want to reauthorize the law, we want to do it in a bipartisan way, and we want to do it before we go back to school this fall, pass it through Congress. So we want to reward excellence. We want to provide a lot more flexibility. And for me, the big trade-off is hold people accountable to a high bar. And where you see states like this raising the bar, college and career-ready standards for everyone, where they're willing to make that hard call, I think we need to get out of the way. Hold them accountable there, but give them a lot more flexibility, a lot more room to move. We can't micromanage the schools in Washington, don't want to. Superintendents, teachers, principals, they know what's best to do at the ground level. We need to get out of the way. Raising standards, 42 states have done that. We get none of the credit. All the credit goes to governors and state school chief officers driving that, local soups. We need a well-rounded curriculum, so we want to put $1 billion behind a whole set of things. Where we have chronic failure, we're going to come down very hard on that. And we're really challenging the status quo. We have dropout factories. We're asking for dramatic change. But I don't think 82% of schools in this country are quote-unquote failing. I think that's stigmatizing. I think it's not honest. If you have certain students who are struggling, let's help them. But to label all those schools as failing is not intellectually honest. It's interesting. A number of folks came out when I said that and said he's exaggerated and he's not true. That's not true. Not one person's come out with a different number. So it is true. And it might vary, 70% in one district, 90% in another. But that is the fact. And I think the biggest thing we're trying to do is to tell the truth. Where we have great successes, we want to celebrate that. Where we're trying to get better, let's do that. Where we have tragic failure, let's be honest about that. But when you're labeling 4/5 of the country's schools as failures, that's stigmatizing, it's demoralizing, it sort of paralyzes folks. And so we want to come up with an accountability system that rewards excellence, that's much more finely gradated, and gives us a chance to differentiate how we respond to different schools.
Hey, Mason, you said I could say something too, right? Well, I just wanted your permission. No, just to add one thing and to echo this. That law did have big imperfections. I do think it was a great start. Even the name. The name made a real statement that I hope we sort of hang on to the thought, because it was important to say we were losing a lot of kids. They were being lost in the averages, as the secretary said. And it was important to zoom in and say, no, we're not giving up on kids of color. We're not giving up on kids who are disabled. We're going to try to find the best school, the best approach for every single one of them. But I think the biggest single failure, or a big failure that needs to be fixed, and the reason I bring it up is because we're trying to fix it here in Indiana. No Child Left Behind operated, as I saw it, based on absolute measures. How many kids pass this test or this test? Now that's not unimportant, but it's not, I don't think, the fairest way to measure a school or a teacher, because kids come in and classrooms come in all kinds, and some teachers and some schools get kids who arrive at a higher level academically, and some get kids who arrive at a very low level. What we seek to reward in Indiana, and Tony has built our entire system to reward what he calls growth, that is improvement. To me, the teacher we want to throw our arms around, or the school, and reward and praise in every way possible, is exactly that one who starts with young people who are behind or are struggling and catches them up. And so, just as I think the federal law should be changed to reward improvement wherever you start, growth wherever you start. We're doing that in Indiana, and the new system we're building here is entirely on that basis. Did I state that, Tony, in an accurate way?
That's exactly where we're going. So growth and gain rather than absolute test scores.
Mr. Weathers.
Good evening. Oh, no? Okay. Yeah. Good afternoon. My name is Jared Weathers. I'm a sophomore here. I've been noticing a big issue about budget cuts and teacher cuts. So my question for you today is, what is the government's plan to better our schools when more and more students are taught within one classroom?
Okay. First of all, whether it's budget cuts or personnel cuts, Jerry, it's almost always a reflection of how many students there are. And when districts shrink, dollars do too, and so does staff. You know, nobody ever sets out to reduce the staff or dollars in a school that is the same or larger than it was the year before. It works the other way. Now, what's the plan? There's several aspects to it, and most of them have been talked about by the Secretary already in one way or another. But the biggest elements are that we are going to ask every district to come up with its own way to identify the very, very best teachers, those who are helping students grow the fastest. And that's the way that a teacher job ought to be protected. If a district shrinks by 10% and so needs 10% fewer teachers, it ought to be the 10% who are the least effective who are let go. That's not the way we do it today. It's the 10% who are the newest. Some of them may be the very best. Some of the best teachers, I can see some of them sitting here that I've met in this city, are some of the younger teachers. And they're exactly the ones whose jobs get cut first today. That's not right for them. It's not fair to them, but worse than that, it's not fair to the students. I already talked about paying the best teachers more once they have been identified. We want more Tindleys. There's a big bill to, we've had real tight limits. We could have a lot more charter schools like this in this state than we do today. We've got some catching up to do. Got big waiting lists. A bill we have would fix that too. And these are the, oh yeah, and also the bill to allow Tony and his department to step into those 20 most heartbreaking schools and try to get people like your principal and teachers like your teachers in there and turn them into a Tindley.
Let me add two thoughts just to get you guys thinking about. Again, this is, I think, a remarkable group of current leaders and future leaders. I think ultimately what we need is more voters. Doesn't matter, Republican, Democrat, I care less, where they go to the voting booth asking how are their political leaders investing in education. And that's often 5th or 6th or 7th and 8th on the totem pole. And I'm obviously a little biased. I think it should be 1 or 1 or 2. And if more voters went, again, regardless of what their politics or ideology were, if they went to the voting booth saying, what are these 2 political candidates doing for education, that would change the national conversation. I think we quite happily as a country spend a lot more money on prisons. No one ever debates that. And we spend $30,000 or $40,000, $50,000 a year to lock somebody up. But if we want to invest a little bit more in education, we got these huge fights on it. So I think our priorities are backwards there. And having more folks step up to the plate and make that part of their calculation, I think could be hugely important. The second thing I'd urge is something I think a lot about. The president met with the president of South Korea. South Korea is one of those countries that's out-educating us today, just beating us, flat out beating us. And he always asks about education. And he asked the president of South Korea, what's your biggest educational challenge? And the president of South Korea said right away, he said, my biggest challenge is that my parents are too demanding. My parents demand a world-class education. And he says, I'm spending millions of dollars to bring in thousands of teachers to teach English because my poorest parents demand that their children learn English in 1st grade, not 2nd. And we all sort of laugh at that, but I wince. I wish we had a lot more parents demanding a lot more of Tony and the governor and I. I wish I had more people beating down my door saying we got to get better faster. I get a lot of the other pressure. I get the pressure slow down. We're going, you're moving too fast. The status quo is okay. And if you had that kind of pressure from the community that we have in South Korea, frankly, it wouldn't matter what Tony did or I did or the governor did. The system would work itself. Parents aren't going to let it slip. We don't yet have that demand. And so how we use parents, community members, young people like you to demand excellence and to drive excellence, that's somehow missing in our country, and we're trying to figure out how to create that. Can't be top down. Ultimately, it's got to be bottom up.
Jerry, Mr. Weathers, I'm going to give you one more thing. It goes back to Mr. Billings' first question. Dollars in has not translated into quality out in the education system. As Mr. Billings pointed out, we spend a lot more per student now, but we don't have the science and math or other performance that other societies are getting. Second, in this district and many such districts around Indiana, this is where we spend the most money per student. So it may come down some as the district shrinks. It'll still be the most money per student, and yet we don't have enough Tindleys. So Money's important. I just told you, we're going to provide more. As of this morning, found a way to do some more. But these other changes that the Secretary's talking about, all the money in the world will not get it, hasn't got it in the past, unless we make the right, unless we spend it in the right way.